Hello friends, and welcome back to the next installment in what I guess we are calling Scrapmas. Today I'll be showing you a project for your heavier and more robust fabric scraps, which is this fantasy-inspired belt pouch. I'm using this boiled wool, which is the leftover from a coat I made earlier in the year. It's much too thick and stiff to use in patchwork like my other scraps, but I think it'll work great for a belt pouch. The key quality of this fabric that makes it ideal for this use is that it basically doesn't fray. I've made a paper template the same size, roughly, as my phone, so I can get a good idea of the size I need to make the pouch. You can use whichever item you want as a guide for your template. The main piece is one long strip that will form the front, bottom, back and top flap of the pouch, which I'm cutting to somewhere between 2.5 and 3 phones in length, and roughly 1.5 phones in width. I'm also cutting 2 sides, which are 2 rectangles just a fraction over 1 phone long and not very wide. A wide side piece will eat up some of the length of your main piece and make the pouch quite bulky, but if you want to be able to fit something like a book into the pouch, you might want quite large side pieces. I'm rounding the bottom of my side pieces as I'd rather a smooth curve, but you can do corners if you prefer. The final important piece is a strap for the back to hold the pouch onto the belt. I'm going to be showing you the kind of pouch that sits on the belt, not hangs down from it. That's what I prefer for heavy things like phones, as they flap around less. As long as it's at least a little narrower than the width of the main piece and long enough to go around the belt and so onto the back, it'll probably work. Mine is about half the width of the main piece and roughly double the size of the belt I like the best in length. I'm also cutting a little reinforcement piece for the strap that is the same width but only about half as long. This is optional, but it's the part of the pouch that gets the most wear and is the most crucial if it fails, so I think it's worth the extra time and effort. I also need some kind of closure. You can use whatever you want, but a little strap often works well for this. I'm actually using the selvage of the fabric, which has this cool contrast detail I haven't been able to use anywhere else. Here's all the pieces together. The long main body of the pouch, which will end up folded to top and bottom like so. I've rounded the edge that will become the flap, that's also optional. The 2 side pieces, they're going to attach to the body at either side like so. And then the strap with its reinforcement piece, they're going to be sewn together and attached onto the back. Finally, I'll add the closures. The first step is to sew the reinforcement piece to the strap. I've got a doubled thread and I'm burying the end with a knot in between the layers of fabric. The reinforcement piece is going to be on the inside, so I'm using a back stitch with the pretty side on the outside of the strap and the long stitches on the inside. If you don't like how this looks, you could use a saddle stitch like I do later in the video. After the pieces were sewn in place, I used a pair of scissors to neaten up the edges and round the corners. I think it looks just a little more polished. The next thing to do is attach the strap to the back of the pouch. I made a guess as to where this would be on the flat piece, and in the end, it was a little low. I think if you're worried, you can skip to the next step, attaching one of the sides, before you attach the strap to be more confident you're putting it in the right place. If you're familiar with live-action roleplay or Renaissance fairs, belt pouches are probably a common object. If you're not, this might be the first time you've seen one outside of a movie or a video game. When I tell you these are hands down the LARP accessory I use most often in real life, it's like all the best parts of a handbag combined with all the best parts of a pocket. In particular, I have no idea how I ever did concerts without them. Again, I used a back stitch with the long stitches on the inside, and I made sure to leave a gap between the stitching and the edge of the reinforcement piece, so there was wiggle room for the belt. I wanted to be very confident I was getting the closure in the right place, so while it would be easier to do on a flat piece, I attached one of the sides first. I did this with a saddle stitch, which is usually used on leather. The two pieces of fabric are placed wrong sides together, and you use two needles, and in this case I used two lengths of thread, working back and forth in a mirrored pattern. I have a bit more explanation of the saddle stitch in my beginner leatherworking video, and I think if you want something more like a tutorial on this specific stitch, head over there. This gives a really cool external seam finish in the style of a leather pouch, which I like, but equally I think you could probably do this inside out and flip these seams to the inside if your fabric was less stiff than mine. Belt pouches are usually made in leather, but I think a heavy fabric like a boiled wool or felt is a pretty good alternative that's cheaper and easier to work with, although I don't expect it will last as long. I think you could probably also add a decorative fabric outer or lining, or use lighter fabric that you've interfaced with a little creative thought, but I haven't tested that yet. So now I have one side in place, I'm realising the strap is a little low, but too late now. With one side still open, this is the ideal time to attach the closures. Personally, I would have preferred a buckle, but this being a scrap project, I'm using what I have, which is two D-rings. I'm using the selvage of the fabric trimmed down to make a long strip attached to the top of the pouch, and then a loop for the D-rings on the front. The bottom part in particular was a bit trial and error. I think if I'd done just a little bar, like the strap on the back of the pouch, that would have worked best, but I started out with a loop, and then when I wasn't completely happy with it, sewed down the top of the loop. It works fine and isn't too obvious. I think I could have passed it off as a design choice if I hadn't said anything. Once the closures are done, you just have to add the second side in exactly the same way as you did the first one. This whole pouch took about 5 or 6 hours of work, I think. It was hard to keep track because I mostly worked on it in odd little free minutes and evenings. I think I started it on a Sunday evening, was finished by the end of Wednesday evening. It's reliant on having the right kind of material, but equally I think you could pick up half a metre of boiled wool and make a bunch of these as presents for all your LARP friends. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to keep the YouTube gods happy. Follow me on other platforms if you'd like to see pictures of my cat, and down in the description box you'll find a link to my Ko-fi page where you can make a one-off or recurring donation to support this channel and my insatiable pouch habit. Ko-fi supporters get early access to all of my videos, and I couldn't do what I do without them. Dream big, and I'll see you next time.